Mr Sheridan, I believe that the route which the government has said it prefers will seriously and irreparably damage the quality of my constituents' lives and the landscape of the Chiltern Hills. Two aspects of the proposed route caused me particular dismay once I began to inspect the details. First, the plan for a viaduct to carry the railway around the western perimeter of Aylesbury, coming at the nearest point to just 70 metres from people's homes, looks certain to cause massive damage to the quality of life of many hundreds of my constituents. Second, I share the sense of outrage which has been expressed to me in letters, in emails and in conversations with constituents since the Secretary of State's announcement on the 11th of this month that the government plans to route the proposed line through the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty, landscape which successive governments, whether Labour or Conservative, have designated as of exceptional national importance. I'm happy to give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend giving way, and I'm grateful for him agreeing that I could intervene, Mr Sheridan, in this debate, which is only short. Would he agree with me that even in the report that has been given to the Secretary of State, when we look at chapter 4.2.39 on the quality of life and the landscape and townscapes, the first mention that is made under that section is that the main landscape impact of HS2 would occur in the Chiltern Hills?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is dismaying that when HS2 made its proposals to the government, not just the preferred route, but even the runner-up were set to carve a swathe of destruction through the centre of the area of outstanding natural beauty. In my constituency, the villages of Great Missenden, South Heath and Wendover would be drastically affected. And I should also say to the Minister that in the last 24 hours I've received the first reaction to the proposal from the Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust, which argues that the preferred route would have both a direct and an indirect impact on woodland sites, predominantly ancient woodlands, and on wetland sites, including a nature reserve and a site of special scientific interest on the Buckinghamshire-Hertfordshire border. And of course, to rub salt into the wound for my constituents and for the county as a whole, this government proposal seems to be all pain and no gain, no direct benefit at all for people living in Buckinghamshire. There's to be no improvement to the infrastructure used by local people, just years of disruption during the construction phase and permanent damage to both our rural and our urban environments. Indeed, I find it quite remarkable that this same government that has designated Aylesbury as a growth area is insisting that the town provides many thousands of additional homes and has refused at the same time to plan for the transport infrastructure to sustain that development, now comes forward and announces plans for a fantastically expensive piece of infrastructure that will bypass the very place that the government has designated for growth. I want today, since we're at the start of what is likely to be a long process, to concentrate on putting to the Minister a limited number of questions on issues which constituents have been raising directly with me over the last 10 days. First, I would like the Minister to say something about the public consultation which I understand is scheduled to begin in October this year. What exactly would be the scope of that consultation? The Secretary of State, in his recent letter to me, stated that both the principle of a new high-speed rail line and the question of a route would depend upon the outcome of that consultation. Now, I imply from those comments that the government accepts that it is perfectly in order for people during the consultation process to put forward alternative routes, or indeed, if they choose to do so, to challenge the principle of HS2 altogether. And I hope the Minister today will confirm that that is indeed the case, that my understanding is correct, and that the government does not intend to begin drafting a hybrid bill until the consultation and the subsequent period of reflection and appraisal to which the Secretary of State himself has referred have passed. Second, what is going to be the nature of this public consultation? There are, of course, a number of bodies like the Chilterns Conservation Board, the statutory agency to safeguard the environment of the Chilterns AONB, the Chilterns Society and the parish, town, district and county councils along the route that will make representations. And I know already that local residents are organising themselves into community campaigns in order to prepare for the consultation. But I want the government not only to listen to public representations, but to be proactive and to ensure that every resident in the affected neighbourhoods is contacted and both encouraged and enabled to take part. Yes.
Great. Would he also agree with me that we need to be reassured that the Department of Transport is paying attention to the detail on this case? Because in the consultation document that has already been issued on the exceptional hardship scheme, which is less than the 12 weeks recommended by the government and is going to most likely take place over a period of PERDA, and therefore there's some interesting rules that it contravenes on consultations, but that also Buckinghamshire County Council was completely omitted from the list of individual local authorities that were part of the list of consultees. Would he agree with me that that sort of lack of attention to detail when the major county council is missed off is rather alarming?
Well, I hope that is a lesson that the Minister and his department will very much take on board. I think the point my honourable friend makes about the impact of the period of PERDA around the general election campaign can have on public consultations and the ability of the government machine to publicise those consultations is something to which I hope ministers will pay attention. It would be, I think, outrageous if people in effect were to lose a number of weeks of publicity for those consultations because of the election. I think the obvious thing to do would be to extend the consultation period by the appropriate number of weeks. I hope too that ministers will make a personal commitment to come to my constituency and to others along the route so they can hear for themselves the views of the people whom their policies are going to affect so dramatically. And I should perhaps add that since the preferred route in my constituency runs within 2 miles of Chequers, I think it likely that whoever holds the office of Prime Minister can expect to have his ear well and truly bent by his neighbours. Lastly, on this point, how long will the public consultation last? The figure of 6 months is being talked about. I have to say that this seems to me a very short time in which to consult seriously people right along the proposed route from Euston through to Birmingham, let alone also to examine the options beyond Birmingham to which the government white paper refers. And the fact that not only will there be an impact of some sort because of the general election campaign, but the fact that Christmas and the New Year seem likely to fall in the middle of the government's proposed consultation on the preferred route would make a notional timetable of 6 months even more compressed in practice. There is already a lot of public cynicism about this consultation, an expectation that this is all being done simply for show. And I look to the Minister to give me the strongest possible assurance that those public fears are mistaken. Secondly, people are going to want and they're going to need access to a lot of detailed information ahead of October so they can prepare their arguments. If at all possible, I would want to see the public consultation take place on the basis of arguments and debate about a commonly agreed set of facts. But to take one obvious example, there is as yet very little information available to show how much noise would be heard by people living along the line of route. And I've been told, talking to some of the environmental pressure groups in my constituency this morning, that HS2 Limited has so far been rather reluctant to divulge any of the detail about its assumptions on noise levels and noise footprints. I know that that is a difficult, technical and complicated bit of work. I mean, I've had ever since I was first elected for my constituency, I've had to deal with the issue of the noise from the M40 cutting through the village of Stokenchurch at the southern end of my constituency. But people have a right to know not just the conclusions reached by HS2 Limited and the Department of Transport, but also the assumptions and the background work on which those conclusions were based. And if there is a reluctance to come forward with that detailed information, then understandably, people are going to assume the worst. And I think it's going to be up to ministers to insist that their department, HS2 Limited, and Network Rail, which of course has done some of its own work on this, on a high-speed proposal, to be very open with the public. Third, it's vital that if this project goes ahead on whatever route, the government shows that it has learned lessons from the experience of building the high-speed Channel Tunnel link through Kent. A few hours ago, I talked to Mr Patrick Begg, the Regional Director of the National Trust. His description of the process involving High Speed 1 was that, in environmental terms, it was brutal, poorly conceived, and done on the cheap. To give one specific example, my local wildlife trust says that one of the lessons from High Speed 1 is that the indirect impact on woodland adjacent to the line in Kent was more severe than had been estimated prior to construction because of interference with the flow of surface water. Local councillors in my constituency, who've already been in contact with their counterparts in Kent, have also been warned that the impact there during construction went far wider than the immediate line of route. One told me he'd been warned he should expect every village and every country lane within 4 or 5 miles of the line of route to be wrecked for some years while the line was built.
Well,
now, yes.
I'm grateful to him. I thought that I would bring to his attention, I don't know whether he's seen it, the News of the Woods, the Chiltern Woodlands project, which in fact the Minister could well look at, because they have helpfully produced a Special Trees and Woods Near You interactive website at www.chiltonsaonb.org/special, which shows that there is an enormous concentration of special trees and woods directly along the line that Lord Adonis has chosen for this route to pass along.
My honourable friend makes a very telling point there. And it's pretty obvious that a construction project of this scale is going to need depots for building materials, arrangements for removing spoil, and access over a long period of time for large numbers of heavy vehicles and plant. And I think the government needs to be straight with people about what would be involved during construction and pledge that after construction, country lanes and the rural landscape in the area surrounding the route will be restored to their previous appearance. Fourth and finally, I want to ask about compensation. I already know many people who are distraught because their properties have been utterly blighted. I know, for example, of elderly people who were looking to rely on the value of their home to provide the capital for which to finance care home fees at a date in the not too distant future. So I welcome the government's decision to propose an interim scheme to help people whose properties are blighted before the law's statutory provisions come into force. But I have to ask the Minister to explain why the scheme the government is proposing is so narrow in scope and so niggardly in the levels of compensation offered. I mean, it's right, yes, that owner-occupiers should be helped, but there may well also be business premises where perhaps the owner had plans to sell and retire, but which are excluded under the current proposals. And without the proceeds from those sales, that business owner will not be able to retire. And why should compensation be capped at 85% of market value? People in Buckinghamshire did not ask for this line, and they get no benefit at all from it. If the government believes that it is in the overriding national interest that this scheme goes ahead, and that my constituents have to accept a massive sacrifice for the greater national good, then it seems to me, Mr Sheridan, that it is a matter of justice that my constituents should be properly compensated and fully compensated for what they stand to lose.